The night Adrian Voss discovered his empire was built on lies, he stood in his penthouse office watching the city lights flicker below like dying stars. His uncle's voice still echoed in his head, calm, measured, victorious. The marriage contract sat on his desk, stained with bourbon he'd thrown against the wall. Elara Kane's name mocked him from the signature line. He'd thought he was negotiating a strategic alliance. Instead, he'd walked straight into a trap designed to destroy everything he'd spent 32 years building. And the woman he'd married 3 months ago? She'd vanished. If you want to see how far Adrian falls before he learns to stand again, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it started. 3 months earlier, Adrian Voss had never questioned his right to rule. The Voss empire stretched across the eastern seaboard like a cancer that had learned to wear expensive suits. Shipping, real estate, private security firms that asked fewer questions than they should. His family's reach was everywhere and nowhere, visible only when it wanted to be seen. Adrian had inherited the throne at 26 when his father's heart gave out during a particularly aggressive hostile takeover. 6 years later, he doubled their holdings and eliminated anyone stupid enough to think the young Voss might be softer than the old one. He wasn't. The boardroom on the 47th floor of Voss Tower smelled like leather and old money. Adrian sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed in a way that made people nervous. He didn't need to lean forward to command attention. The 12 men around the table, they were always men, with 1 or 2 token exceptions, understood that his stillness was more dangerous than another man's rage. "The Harbor District acquisition," Adrian said, his voice carrying the flat, unaffected tone of someone stating facts rather than making requests. Status. Marcus Chen, his CFO, shifted papers that didn't need shifting. "We're at 82%. The remaining holdouts are not a status report, a completion date. Sir, the remaining properties are residential. Families who've been there for... I didn't ask for their biographies, Marcus. I asked when we'll own what we already paid for." Marcus's jaw tightened. He was good at his job, which was the only reason Adrian kept him around despite his occasional attacks of conscience. 2 weeks, maybe 3, if 1 week. Adrian's eyes didn't leave Marcus's face. "Whatever it takes. We have contracts to fulfill." Some of these people have nowhere else to... Then they should have read the fine print before they signed their leases. Adrian stood, buttoning his suit jacket with movements so precise they looked choreographed. "This meeting is over. Marcus, a word." The others filed out with the practiced efficiency of people who knew better than to linger. When the door closed, Adrian turned to face his CFO, who was still seated, still holding those useless papers. "You're developing a conscience," Adrian said. It's inconvenient." "I'm developing a sense of liability. There's a difference." Marcus finally met his eyes. "Push too hard in the Harbor District and we'll have protesters, media attention, maybe even federal interest. The contracts we're fulfilling aren't the kind that hold up well under scrutiny." Adrian almost smiled. "Almost. Is that a threat, Marcus?" "It's a risk assessment, which is literally my job. Your job is to make the numbers work. My job is to decide which risks we take." Adrian walked to the window, looking down at the city that belonged to him in every way that mattered. 1 week. If you can't make it happen, I'll find someone who can." He heard Marcus leave without another word. Good. Loyalty was useful, but only when it didn't interfere with results. His phone buzzed. A text from Julian, his head of security. "Uncle's here, says it's urgent." Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest. Matthias Voss didn't do urgent. Matthias did calculated, deliberate, and occasionally ruthless, but never urgent. The man had ice water in his veins and a smile that made sharks look warm. "Conference room B," Adrian texted back. The smaller one, without windows, where conversations could happen without witnesses. Matthias was waiting when Adrian arrived, standing rather than sitting, which was his way of asserting dominance without saying a word. At 61, he still carried himself like a man who could break you in half and barely wrinkle his shirt doing it. Silver hair, perfect suit, eyes the same pale blue as Adrian's, but somehow colder. "Nephew." Matthias's voice had the smooth quality of expensive whiskey. "You look tired." "I'm not." Adrian closed the door. "What's urgent?" "Always straight to business." Your father was the same way. Matthias tilted his head slightly like he was examining something mildly interesting under glass. It's probably why he died at 54. He died because he had a defective heart. He died because he never learned when to let other people carry the weight. Matthias moved to the table, trailing one finger along its edge. You're making the same mistake. Adrian didn't sit. If this is about Harbor District, Marcus already... This is about you getting married. The words landed like a flashbang in a silent room. Adrian kept his expression neutral, but his mind was already racing through possibilities, angles, threats. I'm not getting married. You are. 3 weeks from now, in fact. Matthias pulled a folder from his briefcase. Leather, Italian, probably cost more than most people's cars. He placed it on the table between them, like a dealer laying down a winning hand. Her name is Alara Kane, 28. Graduate degree in international finance from Cambridge, currently working as a consultant for Meridian Holdings. Adrian didn't touch the folder. No. I'm afraid it's not a request. Everything's a request, Matthias. Some requests just come with more pleasant consequences than others. His uncle smiled then, and it was the smile that had always unsettled Adrian, even as a child. Too genuine, too warm, like a mask that fit so perfectly you forgot there was a face underneath. Let me rephrase, Matthias said. You're going to marry Alara Kane, or the documents I've compiled regarding our family's offshore holdings, the ones that would interest several federal agencies, will find their way to some very motivated prosecutors. Adrian felt rage bloom hot and immediate in his chest, but he channeled it the way his father had taught him, into cold, precise calculation. You're blackmailing me. I'm guiding you. There's a difference. Matthias's smile didn't waver. The Kane family has connections we need, political capital, international banking relationships, access to markets we've been trying to penetrate for years. This marriage secures all of that. It's good business. And if I refuse, then you'll spend the next decade fighting indictments instead of building empires. Matthias picked up the folder, walked around the table, and placed it directly in Adrian's hands. Read it. Meet her. Marry her. In that order. The wedding is already arranged. Your mother is thrilled, by the way. My mother doesn't know about this. Your mother knows exactly what I've told her to know, which is that you've finally decided to settle down with an appropriate young woman from an appropriate family. Matthias headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing. Don't try to find dirt on the Kanes. Don't try to wriggle out of this through legal maneuvering. Don't try to have Alara quietly removed from the equation. I'll know. And the consequences will be immediate. This is insane. This is strategy. Matthias opened the door. Welcome to the only decision you'll make this month that you won't actually get to make. I'll see you at the engagement party. He left. The door clicked shut with a sound like a cell locking. Adrian stood alone in the windowless room, holding a folder that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He wanted to throw it against the wall, burn it, shred it into pieces so small they could never be put back together. Instead, he opened it. The first page was a photograph. Professional, corporate headshot. Alara Kane stared out at him with dark eyes that revealed absolutely nothing. Dark hair pulled back in a style that was elegant without trying to be. Mediterranean features, maybe Greek or Italian ancestry somewhere in the bloodline. She wore a charcoal suit and a white shirt buttoned to the collar. No jewelry except small diamond studs that caught the light. She looked competent, controlled, completely unremarkable except for one thing. Her expression suggested she was analyzing whoever was looking at her photograph, rather than the other way around. Adrian flipped through the rest of the file. Education credentials that were genuinely impressive. Work history that showed steady advancement without obvious gaps or red flags. No social media presence worth mentioning. No scandals, no drama, no obvious leverage points. Either she was exactly who she appeared to be, or she was very good at hiding who she actually was. Neither option made him feel better. The engagement party happened exactly 2 weeks later in the ballroom of the Voss family estate in Greenwich. Adrian's mother had outdone herself with the decorating, white flowers everywhere, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than a mortgage, champagne fountains that struck Adrian as fundamentally stupid but apparently impressed the right people. He stood near the bar, nursing a bourbon he didn't want, watching 300 guests pretend they were here for love instead of politics. You look miserable, said a voice beside him. Victoria Park, his oldest friend and probably the only person in the room who'd tell him the truth. She ran an art gallery in Chelsea and had exactly zero interest in the Voss family business, which made her almost unique in Adrian's life. I'm getting engaged to a stranger because my uncle is blackmailing me. Why would I be miserable? Victoria sipped her martini. Most people would at least pretend to be happy. Most people aren't me. Thank God for that. The world couldn't handle two of you. She tilted her head toward the entrance. Speaking of unavoidable disasters, here comes your bride. Alara Kane walked into the ballroom like she owned it, which took balls considering she was about to marry into a family that actually did. She wore a navy dress that probably cost a fortune while looking like it cost nothing at all. Her hair was down, dark waves that fell past her shoulders. She moved through this crowd with the kind of confidence that came from either vast experience or complete delusion. Adrian couldn't tell which. Their eyes met across the room. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, assessment, maybe challenge. Then it was gone, replaced by a polite smile as Matthias appeared at her elbow, guiding her forward. Adrian? His uncle's voice carried false warmth. I'd like you to meet your fiancé. Alara extended her hand. Adrian took it, noting that her grip was firm without being aggressive. Her skin was warm. She wore no engagement ring yet. That performance would come later, apparently. Mr. Voss? Her voice had a slight accent he couldn't place. British education, but something else underneath. Ms. Kane, welcome to the family circus. Her smile sharpened slightly. I've heard circuses are quite profitable, if managed correctly. Only if you don't let the lions eat the trainers. Then I suppose we'll have to establish who's who, won't we? Matthias laughed, and it sounded genuine, which meant it definitely wasn't. I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Adrian, do try to be charming. Alara, do try not to hold his personality against him. He drifted away into the crowd. Victoria had also vanished, probably sensing this conversation needed privacy despite being held in a room full of people. Adrian and Alara stood facing each other like boxers waiting for the bell. So, she said, how much did they tell you about me? Enough to know this is a business arrangement. Good. Then we're starting from the same place. She plucked a champagne flute from a passing waiter's tray. I assume you've been threatened into this as thoroughly as I have? The admission caught him off guard. You're being blackmailed too? My family is being leveraged. There's a difference, but the outcome is the same. She took a sip, her eyes never leaving his face. Your uncle is very good at finding pressure points. He's had practice. I'm sure he has. She set the glass down on a nearby table, untouched except for that single sip. Here's what I propose. We go through with this performance. We get married. We maintain separate lives as much as possible while presenting a unified front in public. We protect our respective interests. And when the leverage expires, we reassess. Adrian studied her. She was offering a truce before they'd even started fighting, which meant either she was genuinely practical or she was playing a longer game than he was seeing. What leverage does he have on you? Adrian asked. The same question I was about to ask you. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. I think we should both keep our cards close, don't you? At least until we know if we're playing together or against each other. We're definitely playing against each other. Are we? I was under the impression we were both playing against your uncle. She tilted her head slightly. Unless you're more loyal to family than you are to self-preservation. I'm not loyal to anyone. Good. Neither am I. She extended her hand again. Then we have an understanding, Mr. Voss. He took her hand for the second time. This time he noticed the calluses on her palm. Small, barely there, but present. Not the hands of someone who only shuffled papers in corporate offices. What kind of consultant are you, Ms. Kane? The kind that solves problems other people can't. She released his grip. What kind of businessman are you? The kind that creates problems other people have to solve. Perfect. Then this should be a very interesting marriage. She started to turn away, then paused. One more thing. Whatever game your uncle is playing, I didn't choose to be a piece on his board. I don't like being used, so if you're planning to treat me like a pawn in whatever family drama this is, you should know that pawns occasionally make it across the board and become queens. Is that a threat? It's a chess metaphor. But if you need it to be a threat, I can accommodate that too. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing there with the distinct feeling that he'd just lost the first round of something he hadn't realized was a competition. The wedding happened exactly 3 weeks later, as promised. City Hall, minimal guests, maximum efficiency. Adrian's mother cried, which seemed performative, but might have been genuine. He'd stopped being able to tell the difference years ago. Matthias watched from the third row with that same slight smile, like a director watching his play unfold exactly as scripted. Alara wore a simple white dress that probably violated a dozen wedding traditions but looked right on her anyway. She recited her vows without stumbling, signed the marriage certificate without hesitation, and kissed him when prompted with all the passion of a business handshake. The reception was held at a restaurant that Adrian's mother had chosen, filled with people Adrian barely knew, celebrating a marriage that wasn't real for reasons they didn't understand. He drank too much bourbon and watched his new wife charm a room full of sharks like she'd been swimming with them her entire life. "She's good," Victoria said, appearing at his elbow again. "Almost as good as you at pretending." "She's better." Adrian emptied his glass. "I don't trust her." "You don't trust anyone. This is different." "How?" He didn't have an answer for that. Alara chose that moment to glance over at him, raising her champagne flute in a small salute that no one else would notice. Her expression gave away nothing. "She knows something," Adrian said quietly. "About what?" "I don't know yet, but she knows something she shouldn't, and she's waiting to use it." Victoria followed his gaze. "Maybe she's just smart. Not everything is a conspiracy. In my family, everything is a conspiracy." "Then I guess you married the right person, or the worst possible person. I can never tell with you people." Victoria set down her drink. "I'm leaving before I get any more depressed. Try to at least pretend to be happy on your wedding day." She left. Adrian stayed, watching his bride work the room, filing away every interaction for later analysis. The way she leaned in when older men spoke, making them feel important. The way she deflected personal questions with practiced ease. The way she never once looked uncomfortable, despite being surrounded by strangers at her own wedding. Around midnight, after the last guests had stumbled out into the Manhattan night, Adrian found himself alone with Alara in the back of the car Matthias had provided. Black SUV, privacy partition raised, driver who knew better than to listen even if he could. "Well," Alara said, removing her heels with visible relief. "That was awful." Adrian loosened his tie. "Welcome to Voss family events. They don't get better." "Noted." She curled her legs underneath her, which somehow made her look younger, more human. "So, where are we going?" "The penthouse. My penthouse. You'll have your own room." "How generous." "You're welcome to get your own place if you prefer. As long as we maintain appearances, the penthouse is fine." She looked out the window at the passing lights. "I assume it's secure. Your uncle seems like the type to install surveillance. Swept weekly, but yes, he's exactly that type." "Good to know." She was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. I might not answer." "Why did he choose me? Specifically?" There are plenty of families with the connections he mentioned. Why the Canes? It was a good question. Adrian had been wondering the same thing. "I don't know, which means there's something I'm missing. Or something we're both missing." She turned to face him. "My father received an offer 3 months ago. A very lucrative contract with Voss Holdings, contingent on family ties. He thought it was a good deal. I thought it was a trap. Turns out we were both right." "What kind of contract?" "International shipping partnerships. Routes through Southeast Asia that bypass several regulatory frameworks." She smiled thinly. "The kind of thing that makes a lot of money right up until federal investigators start asking questions." Adrian felt pieces clicking into place. "He's setting both our families up to take the fall for something." "That would be my guess, but for what?" She studied him with those dark, unreadable eyes. "What is your uncle actually building, Mr. Voss?" "I don't know, and I don't like not knowing." "Then I suppose we have our first shared problem." She extended her hand across the seat. "Partners?" He looked at her hand, thinking about chess metaphors and pawns becoming queens, and the fact that the last time he'd trusted someone, his father had died 6 months later. But Matthias had made a mistake. He'd assumed Adrian and Alara would remain enemies, too busy fighting each other to see what he was doing. Adrian took her hand. Partners. Until we figure out what game we're actually playing. And then? Then we decide if we're on the same team or not. Fair enough. She didn't let go of his hand. For what it's worth, I don't think your uncle expects us to actually work together. Why not? Because he told me you were impossible to reason with, completely controlled by ego, and would never accept input from anyone you considered beneath you. Her smile was sharp. He was very thorough in explaining what a terrible person you are. He told me you were manipulative, morally flexible, and probably reporting everything I say directly to him. Well, Ilara released his hand. I suppose we both have a lot to disprove. The car pulled up to Voss Tower. The doorman opened Ilara's door while Adrian exited the other side. They rode the elevator to the penthouse in silence, some kind of understanding settling between them that wasn't quite trust, but wasn't quite hostility either. The penthouse took up the entire top floor, glass walls, minimalist furniture, city views that usually made people gasp. Ilara walked through the space with the same analytical gaze she'd used at their engagement party. Your room is there. Adrian pointed to the guest wing. Private bathroom, walk-in closet. Your things should have been delivered already. Efficient. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the space. Do you actually live here, or is this just where you sleep between meetings? What's the difference? Most people have homes, Mr. Voss. Places with personal touches, photos, books they've actually read, evidence of a life beyond work. He looked around his own space, seeing it through her eyes. She was right. It looked like a very expensive hotel suite. I spend most of my time at the office, where I'm sure it's much more personal and homey. You're judging my decorating choices now? I'm observing that you live like someone who's afraid to get attached to anything that can't be measured in quarterly earnings. She met his eyes. Which makes me wonder what your uncle is actually threatening you with. It's clearly not your lifestyle. Adrian felt that cold rage bloom again. You've been married to me for 6 hours. You don't know anything about what I care about. I know you agreed to a sham marriage to protect it. I know you're lying to your mother about the nature of this arrangement. I know you're smart enough to be suspicious of your uncle, but not powerful enough to stop him. She moved closer. And I know that whatever leverage he has, it's not about money or power. It's something more personal than that. You're good at reading people. It's kept me alive this long. She didn't back down from his stare. I'm not your enemy, Adrian, but I'm not going to be your victim either. If we're going to survive whatever your uncle is planning, we need to be honest with each other about what we're protecting. Ladies first, she laughed, short and sharp. Nice try. Here's what I'll give you. My family's shipping business is legitimate on the surface, but profitable because of what happens underneath. Customs officials who look the other way. Containers that bypass inspection. Routes that technically violate sanctions. My father built it over 30 years. Your uncle knows all of it, and if I don't cooperate, he'll make sure the right people find out. Adrian processed this. So we're both trapped by family businesses we didn't build but are responsible for maintaining. Appears that way. She walked to the window, looking down at the city far below. Your turn. What's he holding over you? Adrian joined her at the window. His reflection stared back at him, 32 years old, master of an empire he'd inherited, prisoner of a legacy he couldn't escape. Offshore accounts, he said finally. Relationships with foreign entities that would interest the State Department. Contracts that violate about 15 different international laws. My father set them up. My uncle helped manage them. I inherited them along with everything else. And if you refuse the marriage, he turns over enough documentation to put me in federal prison for the next 20 years and destroy everything my father built in the process. Ilara was quiet for a long moment. So we're both protecting dead men's empires. Looks that way. That's, she trailed off. Pathetic? I was going to say complicated, but pathetic works too. She turned to face him. Here's what I don't understand. Your uncle clearly benefits from both of our families staying powerful. Why would he threaten to destroy us both? Because he's planning something bigger, something that requires our families working together, something neither of us would agree to if we had a choice. So he's removing our choice, and hoping we're too busy fighting each other to notice what he's actually doing. Alara smiled, and it was the first genuine expression he'd seen from her. Then I suppose we'll have to disappoint him. They stood together at the window, two prisoners in a golden cage, watching the city that belonged to them in every way except the ones that mattered. Adrian thought about pawns and queens and the fact that his uncle had just made a very dangerous assumption. He'd assumed they'd remain enemies. What he didn't know was that the Voss family had always produced two kinds of people: the ones who accepted the empire as it was, and the ones who burned it down to build it better. Adrian had always thought he was the first kind. Looking at Alara's reflection in the glass, sharp and calculating and completely unafraid, he wondered if maybe he'd been wrong about that. "We should get some sleep," he said finally. "Tomorrow we start figuring out what Matthias is actually planning." Agreed. She headed toward her room, then paused at the doorway. "Adrian?" It was the first time she'd used his first name. "Yes?" "Thank you for being honest with me about the leverage." "You were honest first." "I know. I was testing to see if you'd reciprocate." Her smile was tired but real. "You passed. Good night." She closed the door. Adrian stood alone in his empty penthouse, looking out at the empire he ruled and the cage he couldn't escape, and wondered if his uncle had just made the first mistake of his otherwise perfect life. Because Matthias had given him a partner, someone with just as much to lose and just as much to gain. Someone smart enough to be dangerous and desperate enough to be bold. He'd meant to divide them. Instead, he might have just created the one thing Adrian had never had before: an equal. Adrian poured himself another bourbon, thinking about chess games and family legacies and the fact that pawns only became queens if they survived long enough to cross the board. The game had started. His uncle had made the first move. Now it was Adrian's turn. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he had no idea what came next. He drank his bourbon and watched the city sleep and waited for morning to show him what kind of player his new wife really was. The morning after his wedding, Adrian woke to the smell of coffee he hadn't made and the sound of someone moving through his kitchen like they owned it. He pulled on a shirt and found Alara standing at the counter, laptop open, phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapid Italian to someone who was clearly not happy with whatever she was saying. She'd already dressed for the day in dark pants and a white blouse, hair pulled back, looking like she'd been awake for hours. She saw him, held up one finger, then finished her conversation with something that sounded like a polite threat wrapped in pleasantries. When she ended the call, she poured a second cup of coffee and slid it across the counter toward him. "Supplier in Milan," she said by way of explanation. "My father's been trying to renegotiate our shipping rates for 6 months. I just got them to agree to his terms." Adrian took the coffee. It was black, no sugar, exactly how he drank it. She'd noticed. "It's 6 in the morning. It's noon in Milan, and I don't sleep much." She turned her laptop so he could see the screen. "I spent the night going through public records on Voss Holdings. Your uncle's name appears on exactly 17 documents in the past 10 years. For someone who supposedly helps run the company, that's remarkably clean. He prefers to work through intermediaries. Smart, makes it harder to trace, but not impossible." She pulled up another screen. These 3 shell companies all made significant investments in Voss Holdings over the past 18 months. Different names, different jurisdictions, but the money all came from the same source. Adrian leaned closer. The trail was subtle, buried under enough legitimate transactions that most forensic accountants would miss it, but Alara had found it anyway. "Where's the money coming from?" "That's the interesting part. Best I can tell, it's coming from Voss Holdings itself. Your uncle is essentially washing company money through shells and reinvesting it back into the company." "That doesn't make sense. Why would he—" Adrian stopped. Understanding hit him like cold water. "He's building parallel ownership. When the time comes, he can claim controlling interest through the shells." "That's my read, but it's not enough yet. He needs something else. Some kind of catalyst." She met his eyes. "Or some kind of cover." "The marriage." "The marriage. My family's shipping connections. Whatever contract he offered my father." Alara closed the laptop. "I think he's planning to move something big enough that he needs legitimate international shipping routes and family connections to make it work." Adrian's mind raced through possibilities. His uncle had always operated in the gray areas where business met politics, met outright crime, but he'd never been sloppy about it. Whatever he was planning now had to be worth the risk of exposure. "We need to know what your father agreed to ship." Already ahead of you. I'm having lunch with him today. She checked her watch. Which means I need to leave in 20 minutes. Are you coming? He's expecting me? He's expecting his new son-in-law to show interest in the family business. Unless you'd rather I handle this alone? It was a test. She was giving him a choice between control and trust, and they both knew it. I'll get dressed, Adrian said. She smiled. Good. Wear something that says successful businessman, not corporate raider. My father responds better to charm than intimidation. I don't do charm. Then fake it. I've seen you work a room. You're capable when you want to be. 20 minutes later, they were in the back of Adrian's car, heading to a restaurant in Brooklyn that Alara said her father preferred. Some Italian place that had been family-owned for 60 years and didn't accept reservations because they didn't need to. Tell me about him, Adrian said. Your father. Alara looked out the window. Thomas Kane. Started with one ship and a lot of debt 40 years ago. Built it into a fleet of 37 vessels through a combination of luck, timing, and selective blindness about what his clients were actually shipping. He's not a bad man, just a pragmatic one. Sounds familiar. Doesn't it, though? She glanced at him. He's going to test you. Try to figure out if you're actually interested in me or just following orders. What should I say? The truth usually works. Tell him you married me because you were forced to, but you're choosing to make it work because you're not an idiot. She paused. He'll respect that more than some performance of affection we both know is fake. The restaurant was exactly as advertised. Small, crowded, smelling like garlic and red wine and bread baked fresh that morning. Thomas Kane sat in a corner booth, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with gray hair and hands that looked like they'd done actual work once upon a time. He stood when he saw Alara, kissing both her cheeks in a gesture that looked automatic but genuine. Then he turned to Adrian, extending his hand with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. Mr. Voss, welcome to the family! Adrian shook his hand. The grip was firm without being aggressive, testing without being obvious. Mr. Kane, thank you for meeting with us. Please, call me Thomas. We're family now, for better or worse. He gestured for them to sit. I already ordered. Hope you like eggplant. They settled into the booth. A waiter appeared with wine that Thomas didn't ask permission to pour, filling 3 glasses with something red that probably cost more than it should. So, Thomas said, looking between them, how's married life treating you? We're adjusting, Alara said smoothly. Learning each other's rhythms. That's one way to put it. Thomas sipped his wine. Your mother called me this morning, Alara. Said you looked beautiful at the wedding, but not particularly happy. I was happy enough. That's what worried her. You're never happy enough. You're either happy or you're not. He turned to Adrian. My daughter doesn't do halfway. It's one of her more annoying qualities. I've noticed, Adrian said. I'm sitting right here, Alara pointed out. We know. We're talking about you anyway. Thomas smiled, but his eyes stayed sharp. So, Adrian, let me ask you directly. Why did you marry my daughter? Alara had been right. Her father was testing him. Adrian could feel her watching, waiting to see if he'd lie, or deflect, or try to charm his way through this. He chose truth, because your uncle gave me a choice between marrying her or watching my family's business get destroyed by federal investigators. He had the documentation to make it happen. So I agreed. Thomas didn't react for several seconds. Then he laughed, loud and genuine. At least you're honest. That's more than I expected from a Voss. You know Matthias. I've done business with him for 15 years. I know exactly what kind of man he is. Thomas's smile faded, which is why I'm curious what he thinks he's gaining from connecting our families. That's why we're here, Alara said. The contract he offered you, the shipping routes through Southeast Asia. We need to know the details. Thomas looked at his daughter for a long moment. You always were too smart for your own good. I learned from you. Unfortunately, he sighed, setting down his wine glass. The contract is simple on paper. Voss Holdings wants to ship high-value electronics through routes that bypass certain customs checkpoints. They pay premium rates. We provide the logistics and the connections to make it happen smoothly. What are they really shipping? Adrian asked. That's the question, isn't it? Thomas leaned back. I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's lying about cargo. The electronic story is clean enough to pass casual inspection. But the weight ratios don't match. The insurance requirements are too high. And Matthias insisted on specific ships, specific crews, specific routes that make no sense if you're just trying to avoid tariffs. Alara's expression had gone very still. What do you think is really in the containers? I don't know, and I made sure I didn't ask. Plausible deniability has kept me out of prison this long. Thomas met Adrian's eyes. But whatever it is, it's big enough that Matthias is willing to tie our families together to make sure I stay compliant. That tells me two things. First, he doesn't trust me to keep quiet if things go wrong. Second, he's planning for things to possibly go wrong. Adrian felt pieces clicking together. When's the first shipment? 3 weeks? Container leaves from a port in Jakarta, travels through the Philippines and Taiwan, lands in Los Angeles. From there, it gets distributed through your domestic network. Thomas poured more wine. I'm guessing you knew nothing about this. I knew nothing about any of this. Thought so. Matthias has been very careful to route everything through divisions you don't directly oversee. Smart man. Terrible person, but smart. The food arrived. They ate in silence for a few minutes while Adrian's mind raced through implications. His uncle was using Voss Holdings to move something illegal through international waters, using the Kane family's shipping network as cover. If it went wrong, both families would take the fall. If it went right, Matthias would own enough leverage over both of them to control everything they'd built. We need to know what's in the containers, Adrian said finally. Agreed. But opening them isn't an option. They're sealed with customs locks that trip alerts have tampered with. Thomas looked at his daughter. Unless you know someone who can bypass those systems. I might. Alara's voice was carefully neutral. But it would be risky. If Matthias finds out we're investigating, he already knows we're suspicious, Adrian interrupted. He has to. He's too smart to think we'd just accept this arrangement without questions. True. But there's a difference between being suspicious and actively sabotaging his plans. She met his eyes. We need to decide right now what we're doing. Are we trying to stop whatever he's planning, or are we trying to protect ourselves when it blows up? It was the question Adrian had been avoiding since last night. His uncle had built this trap carefully. Any move Adrian made could spring it, but doing nothing meant accepting whatever Matthias had planned. I'm not letting him use my family's company to move contraband I know nothing about, Adrian said. Whatever the risk, even if it means the evidence he's holding gets released. He's going to release it anyway, eventually. This is just the opening move. Adrian turned to Thomas. No offense, but your family's in the same position. He's setting you up to take the fall alongside us. Thomas nodded slowly. No offense taken. I came to the same conclusion about 3 days after I signed the contract. He looked at his daughter. What do you think? I think we're all being played, and I think the only way out is to find out what he's really moving and use it as leverage against him. Alara's expression was hard. But we need to be smart. We can't let him know we know. We need to play along until we have something concrete. Agreed, Adrian said. Can you get someone to look at the containers before they ship? Maybe. I have a contact in Jakarta who specializes in solving these kinds of problems. She pulled out her phone, typing something quickly. But it's going to cost, and if he gets caught, it traces back to us. How much? She named a figure that would have made most people blink. Adrian didn't. Done. Set it up. Thomas watched this exchange with something like approval in his eyes. You two work well together. Almost makes me think this marriage might have been worth it. Don't get sentimental, Dad. We're still just trying to survive. But Alara was smiling slightly when she said it. They finished lunch talking about safer topics. The weather, the restaurant, Alara's mother's insistence on throwing them a proper reception party. By the time they left, Adrian had a better sense of his father-in-law. Thomas Kane was exactly what Alara had described. Practical, pragmatic, not particularly moral, but not particularly cruel either. Just a man trying to protect what he'd built in a world that didn't reward honesty. In the car, Alara was already on her phone again, typing messages in what looked like Portuguese. Your contact? Adrian asked. His name's Miguel, former customs inspector who decided the private sector paid better. He can get into the containers without tripping alerts, but he needs 72 hours notice and a clean exit strategy. She looked up. which means we need to know exactly when and where those containers are being loaded. I can get that information. I still have access to the shipping manifests. Your uncle will notice if you're looking at routes you don't normally oversee. Then I'll have Marcus do it. He's already nervous about Harbor District. I'll tell him I'm expanding oversight to international operations. Alara considered this. That works. But we need to be careful. One wrong move and Matthias will know we're actively working against him. The car pulled up to Voss Tower. They rode the elevator in silence, both lost in their own calculations. When they reached the penthouse, Adrian headed straight for his office while Alara disappeared into her room with her laptop. He spent the next 3 hours on calls with Marcus, carefully extracting information about international shipping routes without explaining why he suddenly cared about logistics he'd ignored for years. Marcus was suspicious but compliant, which was all Adrian could ask for. By evening, he had what he needed. The containers would be loaded in Jakarta in exactly 17 days. Miguel would need to be on site at least 3 days before that. He found Alara in the kitchen, eating leftover takeout straight from the container while reading something on her phone. "Jakarta," he said. 17 days. Can Miguel be ready? Already asked. He's in. Wants half up front, half on delivery of information. She set down her phone. I also pulled the shipping company's crew manifests. Your uncle handpicked every person on that vessel. Captain, first mate, even the dock workers loading cargo. All of them have been on Voss payroll for years. He's not taking chances. Would you? She closed the takeout container. I've been thinking, whatever he's moving, it has to be worth enough to justify this level of orchestration. We're talking millions in setup costs alone. Adrian leaned against the counter. What moves in containers that's worth millions and requires this much secrecy? Weapons, drugs, people. She met his eyes. Or something worse. The thought had occurred to Adrian, but hearing her say it made it real in a way he'd been avoiding. His uncle was capable of a lot of things, but human trafficking felt wrong. Too messy, too much risk, not enough profit margin. Not people, he said. Matthias is cold, but he's not stupid. Moving people internationally requires infrastructure we don't have. Then what? I don't know, but we'll find out in 17 days. They stood in the kitchen of Adrian's sterile penthouse, two people who'd been married for less than 48 hours, plotting against the man who'd forced them together. It should have felt stranger than it did. We should eat something that's not leftover Chinese food, Alara said eventually. There's a Thai place 2 blocks over that delivers. You're thinking about food right now? I'm always thinking about food. It's one of my few reliable pleasures. She pulled up a delivery app. Besides, we need to maintain normalcy. Married couples eat dinner together. If Matthias has people watching, and he definitely has people watching, we should look like we're settling into domestic life. She was right. Adrian had been so focused on the immediate problem that he'd forgotten the performance they needed to maintain. They ordered too much food and ate it sitting on the floor of Adrian's living room because Alara said the dining table was too formal and the couch was too low for the coffee table. She was right about that too. Tell me something, Adrian said, watching her navigate chopsticks with practiced ease. How did you get so good at this? At what? Eating Thai food? At strategy, reading people, playing 3 moves ahead. He gestured with his own chopsticks. You're better at it than anyone I've met who isn't in my family. Alara was quiet for a moment. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. My father was destroyed by it. He spent the next 3 years building the business like a man possessed because it was the only thing he knew how to control. I learned very quickly that if I wanted his attention, I needed to speak his language. So I learned shipping routes and customs regulations and how to negotiate with men who thought I was just some kid playing dress-up in her father's office. That why you went to Cambridge? That's why I went anywhere that wasn't Brooklyn. I needed to prove I could build something on my own, that I wasn't just Thomas Kane's daughter. She smiled without humor. Didn't work. Turns out legacy follows you no matter how far you run. Adrian understood that better than he wanted to. My father used to say the empire was a gift, like he was doing me a favor by leaving me everything he'd built. Was he? I don't know. Some days it feels like a gift. Other days it feels like a cage made of money and expectations. He set down his food. What would you do if you could walk away from all of this? All of what? The family business, the expectations, The whole thing. Alara considered the question seriously. I don't know. I've spent so much time trying to prove I belong in this world that I never stopped to ask if I actually want to be here. She looked at him. What about you? I used to think I wanted this, the power, the control, the ability to make decisions that affect thousands of people. Adrian laughed quietly. Now I'm not sure I ever had a choice in the first place. We always have choices. They're just not always good ones. Is that what this is? A choice? Working together? She tilted her head. Yeah, your uncle forced the marriage, but we're choosing what it means. That's something. They finished eating in comfortable silence. Adrian realized with some surprise that he didn't hate this. Sitting on the floor of his expensive penthouse with a woman he barely knew, eating takeout and talking about things he never discussed with anyone else. It was almost normal, almost like a real marriage. The thought unsettled him more than it should have. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. Drinks tomorrow? Need to debrief the wedding spectacle. Adrian showed it to Alara. Friend from college. She wants to meet up. The woman who talked to you at the engagement party? At his nod, Alara continued. You should go. It'll look normal. Plus, you probably need someone to talk to who isn't me or your employees. You want to come? She looked genuinely surprised by the offer. You're asking me to have drinks with your friend? She's going to interrogate me about you anyway. Might as well let her do it to your face. He paused. Unless you'd rather not. No, I'll come. Could be interesting. She smiled slightly. Fair warning, though. I'm terrible at small talk. So am I. Then we should get along great with your friend. The next evening, they met Victoria at a wine bar in the village that she'd chosen specifically because it was quiet enough for conversation. She was already there when they arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a glass of something red. The newlyweds, she said as they approached. How domestic. Victoria, this is Alara. Alara, Victoria Park. She runs an art gallery and has terrible taste in wine. This is a $40 Barolo. Your taste is the one that's questionable. But Victoria was smiling as she shook Alara's hand. Nice to properly meet you. The engagement party didn't really allow for actual conversation. They ordered drinks. Victoria launched immediately into the kind of friendly interrogation she was famous for, asking Alara about her work, her interests, her opinion on Adrian's decorating choices. He lives like a minimalist robot, Victoria said. Tell me you're going to fix that. I live in a Brooklyn apartment with furniture from graduate school, Alara replied. I'm not sure I'm qualified to judge anyone's aesthetic choices. At least you have furniture from an actual period of your life. Adrian's apartment looks like it was decorated by an algorithm. It was, Adrian said. The interior designer used AI mood boards. Both women stared at him. You're joking, Victoria said. I'm not. She said it was cutting edge. It's cutting something. Victoria turned to Alara. Please tell me you're going to save him from himself. I'm working on it. Alara's smile was genuine. But I'm realizing it might take more than new furniture. They talked for 2 hours, the conversation flowing easier than Adrian expected. Victoria had a way of making people comfortable without making it obvious she was trying. By the end of the night, even Alara had relaxed, laughing at stories from Adrian's college years that he'd forgotten she knew. I like her, Victoria said when Alara excused herself to the restroom. She's smart, and she's not intimidated by you, which is rare. She has no reason to be intimidated. Everyone's intimidated by you, Adrian. You cultivate it. Victoria sipped her wine. But she looks at you like you're a problem to solve, not a threat to avoid. It's refreshing. It's a business arrangement. Is it, though? Because you two have better chemistry than most actual couples I know. Adrian didn't have an answer for that. Before he could deflect, Alara returned, and Victoria smoothly changed the subject to gallery politics and artist drama that had nothing to do with shipping routes or family empires. When they finally left, walking back toward where Adrian's driver was waiting, Alara was quiet. Your friend is perceptive, she said finally. She's known me a long time. She also likes me, which is convenient. Means we have at least one person who'll believe this marriage is real. Alara glanced at him. She's right, though, about the chemistry thing. We work well together. We do, which is either very lucky or very dangerous. I haven't decided which yet. The driver pulled up. They rode back in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the penthouse, Alara headed straight for her room, then paused in the doorway. "Thank you," she said, "for including me tonight. You didn't have to. We're partners, remember? Partners in crime, maybe, but that was just normal. It was nice." She smiled, tired but real. "Good night, Adrian." "Good night." He stood in his empty living room for a long time after she closed her door, thinking about chemistry and choices and the fact that 17 days from now, everything might explode. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Matthias. "Family dinner this Sunday. Your mother insists. Bring your wife." Adrian stared at the message, feeling that familiar cold rage settle in his chest. His uncle was already tightening the screws, reminding them that they were still performing for an audience. He typed back, "We'll be there." Then he poured himself a bourbon and stood at the window, watching the city sleep, counting down the days until Jakarta and wondering if he and Alara were smart enough to outplay a man who'd been winning this game for 40 years. Somewhere in her room, he heard Alara on the phone again, speaking Portuguese to Miguel, coordinating details that could save them or destroy them depending on what they found. They had 17 days. It would have to be enough. The family dinner happened on a Sunday that felt too bright for the conversation Adrian knew was coming. His mother's estate in Greenwich looked like something from a magazine spread. Manicured gardens, fountain in the circular drive, windows that reflected clouds like mirrors. Adrian had grown up here and hated every pristine inch of it. Alara stood beside him as they approached the entrance, wearing a gray dress that probably cost less than his mother would expect, but looked expensive enough to pass inspection. She'd been quiet during the drive, reviewing notes on her phone about shipping schedules and customs protocols, like she was preparing for an exam rather than dinner with family. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but I'm good at faking it." She slipped her phone into her purse. "Your mother's going to hate me, isn't she? She's going to be perfectly polite while judging every single thing about you. It's worse than hatred." "Great, can't wait." The door opened before they could knock. Margaret Voss stood in the entrance wearing pearls and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, looking exactly like every society wife who'd ever married power instead of love. "Adrian, darling." She kissed his cheek, leaving a lipstick mark she immediately wiped away with her thumb. Then she turned to Alara. "And my new daughter. How lovely to see you again. Mrs. Voss, thank you for having us." "Please, call me Margaret. We're family now." She stepped aside to let them in. "Matthias is already here, in the study with your father's old scotch, naturally." Adrian felt Alara tense slightly beside him. Neither of them had expected to face his uncle this soon. They'd prepared for his mother's scrutiny, not Matthias's calculated observations. The study was exactly as Adrian remembered. Dark wood, leather chairs, bookshelves filled with volumes no one had read in decades. His uncle stood by the window with a crystal glass, looking out at the grounds like he owned them, which Adrian was beginning to suspect he might effectively own through shell companies and careful maneuvering. "There they are." Matthias turned, smiling warmly. "The happy couple. Marriage treating you well?" "Well enough," Adrian said, accepting the scotch his uncle poured without asking. Alara declined with a polite shake of her head. "Smart girl, this stuff will kill you slowly." Matthias raised his glass in a mock toast. "Though I suppose we're all dying slowly in one way or another." "Cheerful as ever, Uncle." "I prefer realistic." He settled into one of the leather chairs, gesturing for them to sit. "I wanted to talk to you both before dinner, about business." "What about it?" Adrian remained standing. Alara mirrored his posture, which Matthias noted with an approving nod. "The Harbor District acquisition. I hear you've expanded oversight to international operations as well. Interesting timing." There it was, the first test. Adrian had known Marcus couldn't pull shipping manifests without someone noticing, but he'd hoped for more time before his uncle called him on it. "Due diligence," Adrian said evenly. "We're moving into new markets. I want to understand the full scope of our operations." "Admirable. Though I wonder if your sudden interest has anything to do with your new family connections." Matthias looked at Alara. "Your father's shipping network is quite extensive. I imagine you've been sharing insights." "My father's business is his own," Alara replied. "I'm just trying to understand the company I married into." "Of course. Natural curiosity." Matthias sipped his scotch. Just remember that some operations require discretion. Publicly traded companies have obligations to shareholders, but private ventures have obligations to different stakeholders. Meaning what exactly? Adrian asked. Meaning that not everything that happens under the Voss name needs to be reported in quarterly earnings. Some arrangements are better left to those who understand their full context. He set down his glass. I've been managing certain aspects of the business for years while you focused on the public-facing operations. Let's keep it that way. It was as close to a direct warning as Matthias would give. Stay in your lane, don't ask questions. Pretend you don't see what's happening in the shadows. Adrian felt Alara's hand brush against his, so brief it could have been accidental. But he understood. She was reminding him to play along, to not push too hard too fast. Understood, Adrian said. I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes. Good. I'd hate for family dynamics to get complicated. Matthias stood. Now, let's talk about something more pleasant. How's the Harbor District progressing? They spent the next 20 minutes discussing property acquisitions and tenant relocations, surface-level business that meant nothing while implying everything. Matthias was reminding Adrian where the real power sat, that his uncle could shut down projects or greenlight expansions with a single conversation. Margaret appeared in the doorway. Dinner's ready, and Matthias, stop talking business. It's Sunday. Business never stops, Margaret. That's why your husband succeeded. My husband also died of a heart attack at 54. Perhaps business should stop occasionally. They moved to the dining room, where the table was set with china that had been in the Voss family for 3 generations. Adrian sat across from Alara, with Matthias at the head of the table, like he belonged there. His mother had positioned herself at the other end, already looking tired in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time Matthias had taken his dead brother's seat. The meal started with the kind of polite conversation that felt like warfare conducted with forks and wine glasses. Margaret asked Alara about her education, her work, her family background. Each question was friendly on the surface and invasive underneath. Cambridge, Margaret said, cutting her salmon with surgical precision. That must have been quite different from Brooklyn. It was, Alara agreed, but I liked the challenge. International finance, wasn't it? Quite ambitious for a young woman. I had good professors, and I needed to prove I could compete in spaces that weren't traditionally welcoming. How modern of you. Margaret smiled. Adrian never had that kind of drive. Everything was simply handed to him. That's not fair, Mother, Adrian said quietly. Isn't it? Your father built this empire from nothing. You inherited it fully formed. There's a difference between building and maintaining. Matthias intervened smoothly. Margaret, Adrian has doubled our holdings in 6 years. That's hardly just maintenance. With your guidance, of course. Some guidance. But the execution is all him. His uncle raised his wine glass. We should be proud of what he's accomplished. The compliment felt like poison wrapped in sugar. Adrian met Alara's eyes across the table and saw his own understanding reflected there. Matthias was playing them all, positioning himself as the supportive uncle while undermining Adrian's authority with every carefully chosen word. Tell me, Alara, Matthias continued. What are your plans now that you're part of the family? Continue consulting or explore other opportunities? I haven't decided yet. There are interesting possibilities. I'm sure there are. Your father's network opens a lot of doors. He paused. Speaking of which, I had a lovely conversation with Thomas last week. He mentioned you were asking about shipping routes through Southeast Asia. Adrian felt his stomach drop. His father-in-law hadn't mentioned being in contact with Matthias, which meant either Thomas had forgotten to tell Alara or Matthias was lying to provoke a reaction. Alara didn't flinch. I was curious about the family business. It's been years since I paid close attention to the operational details. Curiosity is healthy, as long as it doesn't interfere with existing arrangements. What arrangements would those be? The contract your father signed with Voss Holdings, quite lucrative for both parties. I'd hate to see anything disrupt that partnership. There it was again, the velvet threat. Matthias was letting them know he was watching, that he knew they were digging, that he could make both their lives much harder if they continued. Margaret seemed oblivious to the tension, or maybe she'd learned to ignore it years ago. More wine, dear? She asked Alara, who accepted with a gracious smile. The rest of dinner crawled by like a wounded animal. By the time dessert arrived, Adrian wanted nothing more than to leave, to get back to the penthouse where he and Alara could speak freely without performing for an audience. But Matthias wasn't finished. As they moved to the living room for coffee, he pulled Adrian aside with a hand on his shoulder that felt more like a grip than a gesture of affection. "Walk with me," his uncle said. They stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the gardens. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and crimson. Adrian's father used to stand here with his evening scotch, surveying his kingdom. Now Matthias occupied the same space, and it felt like watching someone wear his father's clothes. "You're making moves," Matthias said without preamble. "Careful ones, but moves nonetheless." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't insult my intelligence, Adrian. You're looking into shipping routes, asking questions about international operations, and you've gotten much closer to your new wife than I expected." He turned to face him. "I'll be honest with you, I didn't think you'd work together. I thought you'd spend 6 months fighting for dominance while I consolidated the pieces I need. But you've surprised me." Adrian said nothing. Sometimes silence was safer than speech. "Here's what's going to happen," Matthias continued. "You're going to stop investigating things that don't concern you. You're going to focus on Harbor District and the public-facing operations like a good CEO, and you're going to remember that the leverage I have over you hasn't disappeared just because you found an ally in your wife. And if I don't, then I start releasing documents, first to the IRS, then to the State Department, then to every journalist who's ever wanted to take down a Voss." His uncle's voice remained conversational, pleasant even. "Your father built this empire on carefully maintained secrets. I'm the one who knows where all the bodies are buried. Metaphorically speaking, of course." "Of course." "I'm not your enemy, Adrian. I'm trying to protect what your father built. Expand it even. But I can't do that if you're constantly second-guessing my decisions." "Maybe I wouldn't second-guess if you'd include me in those decisions." Matthias laughed. "You want transparency? In this business? That's not how power works, nephew. Your father understood that. He kept you ignorant of certain operations specifically so you'd have plausible deniability when things went wrong." "Things like what?" "Like everything that keeps this family wealthy and powerful. Do you think your trust fund came from legitimate real estate deals? Do you think Voss Holdings became an empire by following every law?" Matthias shook his head. "You've lived in a bubble your whole life. I'm not going to pop it now just because you married a woman who's making you question things." Adrian felt rage building, hot and immediate. "Don't talk about her like she's the problem." "Isn't she, though? Before Alara, you were content to run the company without asking uncomfortable questions. Now you're playing detective, risking everything we've built because you suddenly developed a conscience." "I developed a brain. There's a difference." "Not in this family." Matthias moved to the terrace railing, looking out at the darkening gardens. "Let me tell you something your father told me before he died. He said the hardest part of leaving you the company wasn't worrying about whether you could run it. It was worrying about whether you'd want to, once you understood what it actually was." The words hit harder than Adrian expected. He'd never heard this story, never known his father had doubts. "He loved you," Matthias continued, "but he also knew you had a streak of idealism he'd never managed to beat out of you. He was afraid that one day you'd wake up and realize the empire was built on sand and blood and money that came from places you didn't want to look at too closely. So instead he died and left you to make sure I never woke up. He died and left me to protect you from yourself." Matthias turned back. "Whatever you think you're doing with this investigation, stop. For your own sake, for your wife's sake, for everyone's sake. The container's shipping from Jakarta in 2 weeks. What's really in them?" His uncle's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or calculation. "How did you—" He stopped. "Your wife's contact. Thomas mentioned she had connections in Southeast Asia. What's in the containers, Matthias?" "Nothing you need to worry about." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting." His uncle moved toward the terrace door. "Dinner's over, Adrian. Take your wife home. Think carefully about what I've said. And remember that curiosity didn't just kill the cat. It killed everyone the cat loved too." He left Adrian alone on the terrace, staring out at gardens that looked beautiful and dead at the same time. Inside, Alara was talking to Margaret about art galleries and museum exhibitions, playing the role of interested daughter-in-law with practiced ease. She caught Adrian's eye as he entered, reading something in his expression that made her wrap up the conversation quickly. They said their goodbyes. Margaret kissed them both, still smiling that empty smile. Matthias waved from the study, scotch in hand, looking like a man who'd won something neither of them understood yet. The drive back to the city was silent for the first 10 minutes. Then Alara spoke. He knows. Yeah. About Jakarta, about us investigating, all of it. He talked to your father. Thomas must have mentioned something. Or Matthias has been monitoring communications this whole time. She pulled out her phone, typing rapidly. I'm telling Miguel to abort. It's too dangerous now. No. Adrian's voice was sharper than he intended. We're too close to stop now. We're too close to get destroyed. There's a difference. She kept typing. If Matthias knows we're looking, he'll have security on those containers. Miguel could get caught. Or worse. Or we could finally find out what we're actually dealing with. Alara lowered her phone. You're willing to risk everything on a maybe? I'm willing to risk everything on not being my uncle's puppet for the rest of my life. Adrian turned to face her. He just told me my father knew I'd hate this empire once I understood what it really was. That he died afraid I'd destroy everything he built because I couldn't handle the truth. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was. But I'm not going to spend the next 30 years pretending I don't see what's happening just because ignorance is easier. He held her gaze. We go forward. We find out what's in those containers, and then we decide what to do with the information. She studied him for a long moment. Then she put her phone away. Okay, but we do this smart. No communication Miguel can encrypt. No paper trails. And we prepare for the possibility that this ends with both of us in federal prison. Always so optimistic. I prefer realistic. Your uncle's word, not mine. They spent the rest of the drive planning. By the time they reached the penthouse, they had a framework. Miguel would proceed, but with additional security measures. Thomas would be kept in the dark for his own protection, and they'd start moving money into accounts Matthias couldn't freeze if everything went sideways. I need to make some calls, Alara said, heading to her room. Offshore accounts, encrypted communications, the whole spy movie package. How do you know how to do all this? She paused in her doorway. My father's business wasn't always legitimate. I learned young that survival sometimes means knowing how to hide things from people who want to find them. She smiled without humor. Turns out those skills translate well to marriage. Adrian stood alone again, the conversation with his uncle playing on repeat in his head. He poured bourbon he didn't really want and stood at his window, looking down at the city that his family had helped build through deals and contracts and arrangements that probably didn't look great in daylight. His phone rang. Victoria. How was family dinner? She asked without preamble. Exactly as awful as expected. Yikes. Want to talk about it? Not really, but thanks for asking. That bad, huh? She paused. How's Alara holding up? Adrian glanced toward the closed door of Alara's room, hearing her voice through the wall speaking rapid Portuguese. Better than I am, honestly. She's good for you. I know it's complicated, but she balances you out in a way that's, I don't know, healthy, maybe. It's a business arrangement, Vic. Sure it is. That's why you look at her like she's the only person in the room who makes sense. I don't. You do. And she looks at you the same way. Whatever this started as, it's becoming something else. You should probably figure out what before it gets messier. She hung up before he could argue. Adrian stood there with his phone, thinking about chemistry and partnerships and the fact that Victoria had always been too perceptive for anyone's good. Alara emerged an hour later, looking exhausted. Miguel's set. He's bringing additional equipment to bypass secondary security measures. It's going to cost another $50,000, but it's worth it for the insurance. Done. I also moved $1 million into a Cayman account under a shell company that traces back to a consulting firm that doesn't exist. If everything explodes, we'll at least have something to start over with. Adrian stared at her. You moved $1 million in an hour? I told you. My father's business taught me useful skills. She collapsed onto the couch. I'm exhausted. Your family is exhausting. They're your family now, too. Don't remind me. But she was almost smiling. Your mother thinks I'm not good enough for you, by the way. She didn't say it directly, but the subtext was loud. My mother thinks everyone's not good enough for everyone. It's her default setting. What does your uncle think of me? That you're making me ask questions he'd prefer I didn't ask. Good. Then I'm doing my job. She closed her eyes. 2 weeks until Jakarta. Then we'll know what we're really dealing with. And if it's worse than we think, then we figure out how to use it as leverage. Or we burn everything down and start over. I haven't decided which yet. Adrian sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You're very calm about the possibility of destroying everything. That's because I've already lost everything once. When my mother died, my whole world fell apart. I learned that you can survive the worst thing happening, and once you know that, nothing else is quite as scary. They sat in silence for a while, two people who'd been forced together by circumstances and were choosing to stay together out of necessity or strategy or something neither of them wanted to name yet. Thank you, Adrian said finally, for doing this. All of it. You could have just played along with Matthias, kept your head down, protected your father's business. So could you, but you didn't. Neither did you. She opened her eyes, turning to look at him. We're in this together now. Partners, remember? Partners. She stood, heading toward her room again. Get some sleep. We have 2 weeks to prepare for whatever's coming, and I have a feeling we're going to need all our energy. Alara? She turned back. Victoria thinks this is becoming something more than a business arrangement. Victoria's perceptive. Is she right? Alara considered the question. I think we're two people trying to survive a situation neither of us chose. And I think that survival has forced us to trust each other faster than normal. Whether that's something more, she shrugged. Ask me again after Jakarta. She closed her door. Adrian sat alone with his bourbon, counting down days and wondering if his uncle had miscalculated. Because Matthias had assumed they'd break under pressure, that the threat would be enough to make them fall in line. Instead, he'd given them a common enemy, a shared purpose, something to fight for that was bigger than their individual survival. Adrian's phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. This is Thomas. Don't trust anything Matthias told you. He's been playing us all from the start. I have information. Meet me tomorrow. Alone. Adrian stared at the message, his mind racing. It could be legitimate, or it could be a trap, a test from Matthias to see if they'd take the bait. He forwarded it to Alara. 30 seconds later, she appeared in her doorway. That's my father's actual number, she said quietly. He never uses it for business, only for emergencies. You think it's real? I think we're about to find out. She grabbed her jacket. Let's go. If this is a trap, better to spring it now than wait for it to blow up later. The message said alone. Yeah, well, your uncle already knows we're working together. Might as well stop pretending we're not. They took Adrian's car, driving to Brooklyn without calling ahead, without telling anyone where they were going. The address Thomas had sent was a warehouse near the water, the kind of place where shipping containers waited for distribution and questions weren't encouraged. Thomas was waiting outside, smoking a cigarette despite claiming he'd quit 10 years ago. He looked older in the harsh dock lighting, more tired than Adrian had seen at lunch. You brought her, he said, sounding relieved rather than angry. We're a package deal now, Alara replied. What's going on, Dad? Thomas finished his cigarette, grinding it under his heel. Matthias came to see me 3 days ago, asked if I'd noticed you poking around in shipping manifests. I lied and said no. But he knew I was lying. How? Because he has someone inside my company, someone who's been reporting my communications back to him for months. Thomas pulled out his phone, showing them a series of text messages. I found out tonight, my head of operations, guy I've trusted for 15 years, Matthias has been paying him double his salary to keep tabs on everything I do. Adrian felt pieces clicking into place. That's how he knew we were investigating. That's how he's known everything. Every conversation I had with Alara about the containers, every time I looked at shipping routes, all of it. Thomas looked at his daughter. I'm sorry. I led him right to you. It's not your fault, Alara said quietly. It is, though. I should have been more careful. I should have suspected. He turned to Adrian. Your uncle isn't just moving cargo. He's building a pipeline, something that's going to run for years, maybe decades. Whatever's in those first containers is just the beginning. What do you know about the cargo? Adrian asked. Not much. But I know the weight doesn't match electronics, and I know the insurance valuation is higher than anything I've shipped in 30 years. Thomas pulled out a folder. These are the actual manifests, not the ones your uncle's been showing you, the real ones. Adrian opened the folder. The numbers were staggering, container weights that suggested military-grade equipment, insurance valuations in the tens of millions, and destinations that bypassed normal customs entirely, routing instead through private facilities that Voss Holdings owned under different names. "What is this?" Ilara breathed. "I think it's weapons," Thomas said. "But not just any weapons. Something specialized, something that requires this level of security and misdirection." Adrian thought about his uncle's warning on the terrace, the way he'd talked about protecting the family legacy, about secrets that kept them powerful, about his father knowing the empire was built on blood and sand. "We need to abort the Jakarta operation," he said. "If Matthias is moving weapons, Miguel could get killed trying to inspect those containers." "Already did," Thomas replied. "Called him 2 hours ago. He's out." Ilara looked like she'd been slapped. "You had no right." "I had every right. He's my contact, and I'm not sending him into a death trap." Thomas softened slightly. "Look, I know you two want answers, but some answers aren't worth dying for." "So what do we do?" Adrian asked. "Just let Matthias run weapons through our companies and hope we don't get caught. We document everything, build a case, and when the time is right, we take it to someone who can actually stop him." Thomas closed the folder. "I've already contacted a friend at Justice. Quiet conversation, nothing official yet, but she's interested." "That's insane," Ilara said. "If Matthias finds out you talked to federal prosecutors, he's going to find out eventually. Better it's on our terms than his." Thomas met Adrian's eyes. "Your uncle made a mistake when he forced you two together. He gave you a partner, someone who's just as invested in surviving this as you are. That's power he can't control." They talked for another hour in that warehouse, planning strategies and exit plans and ways to protect themselves when everything inevitably exploded. By the time they left, Adrian felt like he was carrying the weight of 2 empires on his shoulders. In the car, Ilara was silent. She stared out the window at passing streetlights, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" Adrian asked. "My father just committed career suicide to protect us. So no, I'm not okay. He's doing what he thinks is right. Right doesn't matter if we're all in prison." She turned to face him. "We're in too deep now. You realize that, right? There's no walking away clean. Whatever happens with Jakarta, whatever Matthias is planning, we're tied to it. Our names are on these companies. Our family's legacies are wrapped up in cargo we can't control. Then we make sure we control the narrative. We document everything, build evidence, and when the time comes, we're the ones telling the story." "That's a nice idea, but stories don't matter when the people with power write the endings." Adrian didn't have an answer for that. They drove back to Manhattan in silence, each lost in calculations about futures that felt increasingly uncertain. Back at the penthouse, Ilara went straight to her room without saying goodnight. Adrian stood in his empty living room, thinking about the manifests in Thomas's folder and the weapons that were probably crossing oceans right now, and the fact that his family's empire was built on exactly the kind of foundation his father had feared he'd hate. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. "Stop digging, or I start releasing evidence. Final warning. M." Adrian stared at the message, then forwarded it to Ilara. She appeared in her doorway seconds later, reading it over his shoulder. "He's scared," she said quietly. "People only threaten when they're afraid you'll find something worth finding. Or when they're about to destroy you and want you to know it's coming. That too." She leaned against the doorframe. "What do you want to do?" "I want to burn his whole operation to the ground. That's not a strategy. That's revenge." "Maybe revenge is a strategy." Ilara smiled slightly. "Now you're talking like someone I can work with." She pushed off the doorframe. "Tomorrow we start building our case. Real documentation, real evidence. Enough that if Matthias tries to throw us under the bus, we can drag him down with us. And if he releases his evidence first, then we release ours and hope the prosecutors care more about weapons trafficking than offshore tax evasion." She headed back to her room. "Get some sleep, Adrian. We've got a war to plan." She closed her door. Adrian stood alone in the darkness, holding his phone with its threatening message, thinking about his father and empires, and the fact that everything he'd built his life around was probably going to collapse in the next 2 weeks. He poured one more bourbon, watching the city lights blur together, and wondered if Victoria had been right. If this arrangement had become something more than business, something neither of them had planned for. Because partners was one thing, but what he and Alara were building felt bigger than that. Felt like two people against the world, bound together by necessity and strategy, and something that scared him more than his uncle's threats ever could. He finished his drink and went to bed, counting down days until Jakarta and knowing that whatever happened next would either save them or destroy everything they'd ever known. 2 weeks. It would have to be enough. The next morning, Adrian woke to find Alara already gone. Her bedroom door stood open, bed made with hospital corners. No sign she'd been there except for the faint smell of her coffee in the kitchen. A note sat on the counter in handwriting that looked like it belonged to someone who'd learned penmanship from nuns. Meeting with my father's attorney. Back by noon. Don't do anything stupid without me. Adrian crumpled the note, then smoothed it out and read it again. The casual intimacy of the message hit him sideways. When had they become people who left each other notes? When had she started signing with just an initial, like he'd know exactly who E was? His phone rang. Marcus. We have a problem, his CFO said without preamble. Harbor District. 3 families are refusing to leave. They've lawyered up, and apparently they've got some nonprofit backing them. Press is sniffing around. Adrian closed his eyes. He'd almost forgotten about Harbor District in the chaos of Jakarta and weapons trafficking and his uncle's threats. How bad? Bad enough that I'm getting calls asking if Voss Holdings has a policy on displacing low-income residents. One reporter used the phrase corporate greed twice in the same question. Stall them. Tell them we're reviewing the situation. Are we actually reviewing the situation, or am I just lying to buy time? Adrian thought about his father, about empires built on sand and blood, about the fact that everything he touched seemed designed to hurt people who couldn't fight back. We're reviewing it. Get me the actual numbers on what it would cost to relocate those families properly. Not the bare minimum legal requirement, what it would actually cost to do it right. Marcus was silent for several seconds. Who are you and what have you done with my boss? I'm serious, Marcus. I know. That's what's scaring me. Papers rustled on the other end. I'll have numbers by end of day, but Adrian, your uncle's not going to like this. He's been very clear that Harbor District needs to close on schedule. Let me worry about my uncle. That's what I'm afraid of. Marcus hung up. Adrian stood in his empty kitchen, holding his phone, thinking about the fact that 2 months ago he wouldn't have questioned displacing families if it meant closing a deal. Now he couldn't stop thinking about the people whose lives he was disrupting in the name of profit margins and contractual obligations. Alara was changing him, or maybe she was just holding up a mirror and forcing him to see what had always been there. His phone buzzed again. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Rooftop. Now. Come alone. Adrian's first instinct was to ignore it. His second was to call building security. But something about the message felt familiar, urgent in a way that suggested ignoring it would be a mistake. He took the elevator to the roof access, which required a key card only he and building maintenance had. The door was already unlocked. Julian stood by the edge, Adrian's head of security looking deeply uncomfortable in the morning light. He was a solid man in his 40s, former military, someone Adrian had trusted with everything from personal protection to corporate espionage for the past 6 years. You shouldn't be here, Julian said. You texted me to come here. I know, I shouldn't have. He turned to face Adrian. Your uncle offered me $250,000 to install surveillance in your penthouse. Full audio. Cameras in every room except the bathrooms. He wanted real-time access to everything you and your wife discuss. Adrian felt ice settle in his stomach. Did you do it? No, but he thinks I did. I installed dummy equipment, stuff that looks real but doesn't transmit anything. Told him it would take a week to get everything operational. Julian's jaw tightened. He's planning something, Adrian. Something that requires knowing exactly what you're planning before you plan it. Why are you telling me this? Because your father hired me, not your uncle. And your father told me if anything ever happened to him, my job was to protect you, not the company, not the family name. You. Julian pulled an envelope from his jacket. This is everything I've collected on Matthias over the past 5 years. Financial records, communication logs. Meetings with people who shouldn't exist. I was gathering it for insurance in case he ever tried to push me out. But you need it more than I do. Adrian took the envelope, feeling the weight of it. He's going to know you gave me this. Probably, which is why I'm disappearing after this conversation. I've got a place in Costa Rica, offshore accounts he can't touch. I'll be gone by tonight. Julian extended his hand. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Your father would have hated what this company became under Matthias. They shook hands. Julian left without another word, disappearing back into the building like he'd never been there. Adrian stood alone on the rooftop, holding an envelope that probably contained enough evidence to destroy his uncle, watching the city wake up below him. He thought about dummy surveillance equipment and $250,000 bribes and the fact that Matthias had been willing to spy on his own nephew's bedroom conversations. The rage that bloomed this time wasn't cold. It was white-hot and clarifying. He was still standing there when Alara found him 20 minutes later, stepping onto the roof with her jacket whipping in the wind. Your doorman said you came up here. What's going on? Adrian handed her the envelope. She opened it, scanning the first few pages, her expression shifting from curious to shocked to coldly furious. Where did you get this? Julian, my head of security. Matthias tried to bribe him into surveilling us. Did he? No. He installed fake equipment and warned me instead. Adrian moved to the edge, looking down at the street far below. We have him, Alara. This is everything. Financial crimes, weapons deals, payoffs to government officials. Enough to put him in federal prison for the rest of his life. She kept reading, flipping through pages with increasing speed. This is... Adrian, some of these deals date back 15 years. Your father's signature is on half of them. The words hit like a physical blow. Adrian had suspected his father was involved, but seeing the evidence was different. Let me see. She handed him specific pages. There was his father's handwriting, approving shipments that the manifest described as industrial equipment, but the insurance valuations suggested were something much more dangerous. There were contracts with foreign entities that were definitely on watch lists. There were payments to shell companies that existed only to launder money. And running through all of it, like a thread connecting each crime, was Matthias's name. Your uncle wasn't just helping your father, Alara said quietly. He was running the operation. Your father signed what Matthias told him to sign. That doesn't make him innocent. I didn't say it did, but it changes the story. She looked at Adrian. If we release this, we destroy your father's legacy along with your uncle's. Adrian thought about that. His father, who'd built an empire and died afraid his son would hate him for it. His father, who'd kept Adrian ignorant specifically so he'd have deniability. His father, who'd trusted Matthias to protect the family and gotten betrayed for it. I don't care, Adrian said. My father made his choices. I'm making mine. That's very noble. But are you sure you're ready for what comes after? Because once we expose this, there's no going back. The Voss name won't just be damaged. It'll be destroyed. Good. Maybe it should be. Alara studied him for a long moment. You mean that? I do. Adrian took the envelope back, holding it like it weighed nothing and everything at the same time. I'm tired of protecting a legacy built on hurting people. I'm tired of pretending the empire is more important than doing what's right. And I'm tired of being my uncle's puppet because I'm too afraid to cut the strings. Okay, she said it simply, without drama. Then we do this. We take everything to Thomas's contact at Justice. We cooperate fully. And we accept that our lives are going to blow up in ways we can't predict. You're willing to do that? Risk everything? Adrian, I was willing to risk everything the moment I agreed to help you investigate. I didn't do it halfway then, and I'm not doing it halfway now. She moved closer. We're partners, remember? That means when you jump, I jump. He looked at her standing there on the roof, hair whipping in the wind, expression set with determination that reminded him why he'd started trusting her in the first place. Victoria had been right. This had stopped being business weeks ago. Maybe it had never been business at all. We should call Thomas, Adrian said. Set up a meeting with his justice contact. Already did. While you were up here having your rooftop revelation. She can meet us tonight, but it has to be somewhere secure. Somewhere Matthias won't have eyes. Where? Victoria's gallery, after hours. I called her too. She said to tell you that she always knew you'd eventually try to burn down the family empire, and she's honored to provide the matches. Adrian almost smiled. Of course you called Victoria. She likes me, and she has a space that's private, neutral, and equipped with enough expensive art that federal prosecutors feel fancy meeting there. Alara checked her watch. We have 8 hours. We should spend it organizing this evidence into something coherent. They worked through the afternoon in Adrian's office, spreading Julian's documents across every available surface. Financial crimes in one pile, weapons trafficking in another, payoffs and bribes in a third. By evening, they had a timeline that stretched back nearly 2 decades, showing how Matthias had systematically used Voss Holdings as a front for international weapons deals worth hundreds of millions. Your father started it, Alara said, pointing to early documents. But Matthias scaled it, made it bigger, more sophisticated, more dangerous. By the time your father died, Matthias was essentially running a parallel company inside the legitimate one. And when I inherited, he kept me focused on the public operations while he expanded the illegal ones. Exactly. You were the perfect cover. Young CEO, media-friendly, clean enough to pass scrutiny while he operated in the shadows. Oh, she sat back. The marriage makes sense now. He needed our families connected so he could route weapons through Kane's shipping without raising flags. If anyone investigated, it would look like normal business between in-laws. Adrian thought about the containers sitting in Jakarta right now, waiting to be loaded with cargo that would make both their families complicit in whatever Matthias had planned. We need to stop that shipment. Already on it. My father filed a delay with the Port Authority. Equipment malfunction, needs inspection. It'll buy us a few days. She glanced at him. But Adrian, once we hand this over to justice, everything happens fast. Raids, arrests, asset freezes. Are you ready for that? Are you? I asked first. He considered the question seriously. Was he ready to watch federal agents swarm Voss Tower? Ready to see his family name in headlines connected to international weapons trafficking? Ready to lose everything his father had built, even the legitimate parts, because it was all so tangled together it couldn't be separated? Yeah, he said. I'm ready. They arrived at Victoria's gallery after dark. She'd closed early, turned off the street front lights, and was waiting inside with wine and nervous energy. I can't believe I'm hosting a meeting with federal prosecutors, she said, pouring 3 glasses without asking. This is either the coolest or stupidest thing I've ever done. Probably both, Alara said, accepting the wine. That's what I thought. Victoria turned to Adrian. You're sure about this? Because once you start talking to justice, you can't untalk to them. I'm sure. Okay, then I'm sure too. She raised her glass. To burning down empires and hoping we don't burn ourselves in the process. They drank. 5 minutes later, a woman in her 50s arrived, dressed in a gray suit that screamed federal employee. She introduced herself as Sarah Chen, senior prosecutor for the Southern District, and immediately made it clear she wasn't here to make friends. Thomas Kane says you have evidence of weapons trafficking using corporate shipping routes, she said, skipping pleasantries entirely. I'm listening. Adrian laid out everything. Julian's documents, the manifests, the shell companies, the timeline showing how Matthias had built an empire inside an empire. Sarah took notes in silence, her expression giving away nothing. When Adrian finished, she sat back. This is comprehensive, almost too comprehensive, which makes me wonder why you're bringing it to me instead of using it to protect yourselves. Because we're trying to do the right thing, Alara said. The right thing would have been not participating in international weapons trafficking in the first place. We didn't know, Adrian said. My uncle kept us ignorant specifically so we'd have deniability. Ignorance isn't innocence, Mr. Voss. Your signature is on corporate documents authorizing these shipments. You may not have known what was in the containers, but you authorized the routes, the insurance, the whole operation. Sarah leaned forward. If I take this case, you're both going to be implicated. Maybe not criminally if you cooperate fully, but your companies will be seized, your assets frozen, your reputations destroyed. Are you prepared for that? Adrian met her eyes. Yes. And you, Ms. Kane? I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to stop my family's business from being used to move weapons that kill people. Alara's voice was steady. So, yes, I'm prepared. Sarah studied them both. Okay, here's how this works. You give me everything you have, every document, every communication, every piece of evidence. You agree to wear wires when meeting with your uncle. You testify before a grand jury, and you accept that if this goes to trial, your lives are going to be examined in ways that won't be pleasant. We understand, Adrian said. Do you? Because I've seen families destroy each other over less than this. I've seen marriages end, businesses collapse. People lose everything they've built because they thought doing the right thing would be easy. She closed her notebook. This isn't a movie. There's no guaranteed happy ending. You could do everything right and still end up in prison because a jury decides you knew more than you claim. Or you could walk free and spend the rest of your lives knowing you destroyed your own families to take down one man. We know, Ilara said quietly, but we're doing it anyway. Sarah looked between them, then nodded. Okay, I'll need 72 hours to review everything, build a preliminary case, and get authorization for surveillance warrants. In the meantime, you act normal. Go to work, have dinner with family, maintain your routines. Don't tip off Matthias that anything's changed. He already knows we're investigating, Adrian said. Then he knows you're curious. He doesn't know you've turned everything over to federal prosecutors. There's a difference. Sarah stood. I'll be in touch. Don't call me. Don't email me. I'll contact you when it's time. She left as abruptly as she'd arrived. The three of them sat in silence for several minutes. Well, Victoria said finally, that was terrifying. That was necessary, Adrian corrected. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She refilled their wine glasses. So what now? Now we go home and pretend everything is normal while we wait for our entire lives to explode, Ilara said. She sounded tired in a way Adrian hadn't heard before. They thanked Victoria and left. In the car, Ilara stared out the window again, that same distant expression she got when processing too much information at once. You okay? Adrian asked. I just handed evidence to federal prosecutors that's going to destroy my father's company, the business he spent 40 years building, the legacy he wanted to leave me. She turned to look at him. No, I'm not okay, but I will be. How do you know? Because I've survived worse, and because this time I'm not alone. She reached across the seat, taking his hand. We're in this together, right? Adrian looked at their joined hands, thinking about how natural it felt, how necessary. Together. They drove back to the penthouse in silence, still holding hands like lifelines. When they arrived, they found Matthias sitting in Adrian's living room, whiskey in hand, looking like he owned the place. There you are, his uncle said pleasantly. I was beginning to worry. Adrian felt Ilara's hand tighten on his. They'd known this was coming, but not this soon. Not before they'd had time to prepare. How did you get in? Adrian asked. I own 40% of this building through shell companies. I've always had keys. Matthias stood. We need to talk. About your recent activities, about conversations you've been having with people you shouldn't be talking to. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Matthias pulled out his phone, playing an audio recording. Thomas's voice, clear and unmistakable, talking to someone about shipping manifests and weapons trafficking and contact with federal prosecutors. Adrian's blood went cold. Where did you get that? Your father-in-law's head of operations, the one who's been reporting to me for months. Turns out Thomas had a conversation with someone at Justice 3 days ago. Preliminary only, but enough to concern me. Matthias pocketed his phone. So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly what you gave them. You're going to help me contain this. And then you're going to spend the rest of your lives being very grateful I didn't destroy both your families tonight. No, Adrian said. Matthias tilted his head. I'm sorry? I said no. We're not helping you. We're not containing anything. And you're not destroying anyone. Adrian moved between his uncle and Ilara. It's over, Matthias. Whatever you were planning with Jakarta, whatever empire you were building, it ends now. His uncle laughed. You think you can stop me? With what? The evidence Julian gave you? The documents Thomas collected? He shook his head. I've known about all of it. Every conversation, every meeting, every document you thought you were hiding. I let you collect it because I wanted to see how far you'd go, what you were willing to risk. Then you know we took it to federal prosecutors. I know you took something to someone tonight, But without corroborating evidence, without physical proof of actual crimes, all you have is paper. Matthias moved to the window. The containers in Jakarta. Already moved. Different port, different route, different manifest. By the time justice gets a warrant, there will be nothing to find. Ilara stepped forward. Then why are you here? If you've already won, why waste time threatening us? It was a good question. Matthias's smile faltered slightly. Because you're not sure you've won, she continued. Because you're afraid we have something you don't know about. Something Julian gave us that wasn't in the files you've seen. Adrian understood then. His uncle was fishing, trying to figure out exactly what evidence they had, what damage they could do. Get out, Adrian said quietly. This is your last chance. Get out of my home, now. Matthias studied him for a long moment. Then he set down his whiskey glass, perfectly centered on the coffee table. You're making a mistake, both of you. When this is over, when the dust settles, you'll understand that everything I did was to protect this family. You used this family. There's a difference. Is there? Your father didn't think so. He understood that power requires compromise, that empires aren't built by people worried about morality. Matthias moved toward the door. You're going to lose everything, Adrian. The company, the name, the legacy. And for what? A sense of righteousness that won't matter when you're testifying against your own blood? He left. The door closed with a quiet click. Adrian stood frozen, Ilara beside him, both of them processing what had just happened. Matthias knew about Thomas's contact at Justice. He'd moved the containers. He'd anticipated their moves and countered them before they'd even finished making them. He's bluffing, Ilara said. About the containers. He has to be. What if he's not? Then we tell Sarah Chen, and she raids every Voss Holdings facility until she finds them. She turned to face him. This doesn't change anything. We're still cooperating. We're still doing this. Even though he knows? Especially because he knows. It means we're close to something he can't control. She grabbed her phone. I'm calling my father, warning him that Matthias has recordings. Then I'm calling Sarah Chen and telling her the timeline just accelerated. She disappeared into her room. Adrian stood alone in his living room, looking at the whiskey glass his uncle had left behind like a calling card. His phone buzzed. A message from Julian. Get out. Now. Matthias has people coming. Not safe there. Adrian was already moving, heading to Ilara's room. She was still on the phone with her father, but she saw his expression and ended the call immediately. What? Julian says we need to leave. Matthias has people coming. People like what? Security? Police? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. He grabbed her jacket, tossed it to her. We go to your father's warehouse, somewhere Matthias can't access easily. They were in the elevator when his phone rang. Sarah Chen. I just got a call from my supervisor, she said without preamble. Someone with serious pull is trying to shut down our investigation before it starts. They're claiming national security concerns, classified operations, the whole 9 yards. That's Matthias. He has contacts in the Defense Department. I figured, which means we need to move faster than planned. Can you meet me in 2 hours? Federal Building, downtown. Bring everything you have. We'll be there. He ended the call as the elevator reached the parking garage. They ran to his car, Adrian driving because Ilara's hands were shaking too badly. This is happening, she said. Actually happening. Yeah. We could still run. Leave the country. Start over somewhere Matthias can't reach us. Adrian looked at her. She was serious. Is that what you want? I want to survive this. I want my father to survive this. I want to wake up tomorrow and not wonder if federal agents are raiding my house or if your uncle sent someone to make us disappear. She laughed, high and tight. But I also want to see his face when he realizes we actually beat him. So no, I don't want to run. Good, because neither do I. They drove to Brooklyn, to the warehouse where Thomas was waiting with 2 lawyers and enough nervous energy to power the building. He hugged Ilara so hard she gasped. I should never have gotten you involved in this, he said. You didn't. I got myself involved. She pulled back. Dad, Matthias has recordings of your conversation with Justice. He knows everything. I know. My guy already told me. He's in custody, apparently. Matthias called in favors with Homeland Security, claimed he was leaking classified information. Thomas looked at Adrian. Your uncle has more power than we thought. Then we use it against him. Show prosecutors exactly how deep his connections go. Adrian checked his watch. Sarah Chen wants to meet in 90 minutes. We bring everything. We cooperate fully, and we pray that justice moves faster than Matthias can shut them down. The next hour was a blur of organizing documents, coordinating with Thomas's lawyers, and trying to ignore the growing certainty that they were about to step off a cliff without knowing if there was ground below. At 10 minutes before their scheduled meeting, Alara's phone rang. She answered, listened for 30 seconds, then went very still. "That was my mother," she said quietly. "Matthias just showed up at her house. Told her I was about to destroy the family, that she should convince me to stop before it's too late." "What did she say?" "She told him to leave before she called the police. Then she called me to ask what the hell is going on." Alara met Adrian's eyes. "I can't lie to her anymore. She deserves to know. Tell her after we meet with Sarah. Tell her everything, but tell her when we have federal protection in place." They drove to the federal building in Adrian's car, Thomas following in his own vehicle with his lawyers. The building loomed against the night sky, all concrete and glass and the kind of institutional architecture designed to intimidate. Sarah Chen met them in a conference room on the 8th floor. She looked like she hadn't slept, which Adrian took as a good sign. Tired prosecutors were prosecutors who cared. "We have a problem," she said immediately, "and a solution, but you're not going to like it." "What's the problem?" Adrian asked. "Matthias Voss has contacts at very high levels, Defense Department, State Department, people who can classify investigations with a phone call. They're claiming your evidence relates to ongoing intelligence operations, that pursuing it would compromise national security." "That's bullshit," Thomas said. "I agree, but it's effective bullshit. My supervisor is getting pressure to drop this." "And the solution?" Alara asked. Sarah pulled out a folder. "You go public. Before we can raid anything, before we can make arrests, you hold a press conference and release everything. Make it so public that classifying it becomes impossible." Adrian stared at her. "You want us to do your job for you?" "I want you to force my hand. If this information is already public, I can pursue it without worrying about national security shutdowns. But it means you'll be targets. Matthias will come after you legally, financially, maybe physically, and you'll have no protection until we can build a strong enough case to arrest him." "How long will that take?" Alara asked. "Weeks, maybe months. So we destroy our lives publicly, spend weeks dodging whatever Matthias throws at us, and hope you eventually arrest him before he destroys us?" Adrian laughed bitterly. "That's your solution?" "That's the only solution that works given the pressure we're facing." Sarah met his eyes. "I know it's not ideal, but it's the difference between burying this forever and actually bringing your uncle to justice." Adrian looked at Alara. She looked at her father. Thomas looked at his lawyers, who were both shaking their heads like this was the worst idea they'd ever heard. "We do it," Alara said. "We go public, tomorrow morning, every major outlet, full disclosure, everything." "Are you insane?" one of Thomas's lawyers said. "You'll be sued into oblivion. Criminal charges, civil penalties, personal liability." "I don't care," Alara interrupted. "I'm tired of being afraid of Matthias. I'm tired of hiding. If the only way to stop him is to burn everything down publicly, then we burn it down." She was looking at Adrian when she said it, asking without asking if he was ready for this. He thought about his father's legacy, about empires built on blood, about the fact that doing the right thing had never guaranteed anything except the satisfaction of knowing you tried. "Tomorrow morning," Adrian said, "we tell the world everything." Sarah nodded. "I'll have press contacts ready. But Adrian, Alara, once you do this, there's no walking it back. Your lives will never be the same." "They were never going to be the same anyway," Adrian said. "At least this way we control the narrative." They spent the rest of the night preparing statements, coordinating with journalists, and accepting that they were about to become the biggest story in business news. Thomas looked like he'd aged a decade in one evening. Alara was calm in a way that scared Adrian because he recognized it. It was the calm of someone who'd accepted that survival meant sacrifice. At 4 a.m, they finally left the federal building. Dawn was still hours away, but the city was already stirring. Adrian drove Alara home through empty streets, both of them too exhausted to speak. When they reached the penthouse, she didn't go to her room. She followed him to his, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure she was allowed to enter. Can I stay here tonight? She asked quietly. I don't want to be alone. Adrian pulled back the covers without answering. She kicked off her shoes and climbed in beside him, fully clothed, curling into his side like it was the most natural thing in the world. We're going to lose everything, she said into the darkness. I know. Was it worth it? Adrian thought about that. About partnerships and choosing who you stood beside when everything else could be lost. About the fact that somewhere in the past 2 months, Alara had stopped being an obligation and started being the person he trusted most in the world. Yeah, he said. It was worth it. She fell asleep against his shoulder. Adrian stayed awake, watching the sky lighten through the window, counting down hours until they destroyed everything his family had built, and hoping it would be enough to stop a man who'd spent 40 years learning how to win. Morning came too fast and too bright. Adrian woke to find Alara already awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression that suggested she'd been doing calculations in her head for hours. We have 3 hours until the press conference, she said without looking at him. I've been lying here trying to figure out if there's any version of today where we don't lose everything. And? There isn't. But at least we lose it on our terms. They got up, showered separately, and dressed like they were preparing for battle rather than breakfast. Alara wore a navy suit that made her look older, more serious. Adrian chose the charcoal gray his father had always worn for difficult board meetings, armor disguised as business attire. Sarah Chen called at 7. The press is confirmed. 10:30 at the federal building steps. We'll have security, but expect chaos. Matthias's legal team is already filing injunctions to stop you from speaking. Will they succeed? Adrian asked. Not in 3 hours they won't, but expect lawsuits to start flying the second you finish talking. She paused. Are you both absolutely sure about this? Adrian looked at Alara, who was listening on speaker. She nodded once, decisive. We're sure, he said. They met Thomas at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the federal building. He looked like he'd been through a war, but his eyes were clear and determined. Your mother called, he told Alara. She knows everything now. I told her myself. Figured it was better coming from me than from a news broadcast. How did she take it? She said she always knew your consulting work was cover for something more interesting. Then she asked if we needed a good lawyer. Thomas smiled slightly. She's tougher than I give her credit for. She had to be to marry you, Alara said. At 9:30, Adrian's phone rang. Matthias. Don't answer it, Alara said immediately. But Adrian did anyway, putting it on speaker so they could all hear. Nephew. His uncle's voice was calm, controlled, absolutely furious underneath. I'm going to give you one last chance to reconsider this spectacularly stupid decision. There's nothing to reconsider. Really? Because I have documents being delivered to every major outlet right now, showing that you personally authorized the shipments you're about to claim ignorance of. Your signature, your approval, your criminal liability. Adrian felt ice in his stomach. You're lying. Am I? Check your email. I sent copies to you and your lovely wife might want to review them before you stand up and tell the world you're innocent. The call ended. Adrian and Alara both pulled out their phones. The email was there, with attachments that made Adrian's blood run cold. They were real documents, his actual signature, authorizing shipments on dates and routes that matched exactly with what Julian's evidence showed were weapons deals. He'd signed them thinking they were routine approvals for international expansion. Matthias had buried the illegal cargo in legitimate paperwork, and Adrian had approved it all without reading the fine print. He set me up, Adrian said quietly. Months ago, maybe years. Every signature, every approval, all of it designed to make me look complicit. Thomas was reading over his shoulder. These won't hold up in court. Any forensic accountant will see their deliberate misdirection. But they'll hold up in the media, Alara said. That's the point. We go public claiming Adrian's innocent, Matthias releases these, and suddenly the narrative shifts to CEO tries to blame Uncle for his own crimes. Sarah Chen arrived at their table, breathless. I know about the documents. Matthias's team just sent them to my office with a very polite suggestion that I reconsider my investigation. What do we do? Adrian asked. We adjust the strategy. You don't claim complete innocence. You admit you signed documents without proper oversight. You take responsibility for failing to supervise operations adequately. And then you pivot to showing how Matthias systematically manipulated the entire company to hide his operation. She pulled out her own phone. I have analysts going through the documents now. They're finding enough evidence of deliberate obfuscation that we can argue you were deceived rather than complicit. Will that work? Alara asked. Maybe, if you're willing to fall on your sword publicly, admit mistakes, show genuine remorse, and then direct all fire at Matthias. Sarah looked at Adrian. It means you'll probably face charges. Negligence, at minimum, maybe more. But it's better than conspiracy to traffic weapons. Adrian thought about that, about admitting publicly that he'd failed as a CEO, that he'd been so focused on profit margins and expansion that he'd missed weapons trafficking happening under his own signature. It would destroy his reputation, damage his credibility, make him look incompetent at best and criminal at worst. But it was true. He had failed. He'd been so desperate to prove he could run his father's empire that he'd stopped asking questions about where the money actually came from. I'll do it, he said. Adrian, Alara started. He's right. I signed those documents. I approved those shipments. I didn't know what they contained, but I should have. He met her eyes. If taking responsibility is what it takes to bring him down, then that's what I do. Thomas squeezed his shoulder. Your father would be proud, not of the mistakes, but of owning them. They spent the next hour rehearsing statements, coordinating with Sarah's team, and watching as news vans started gathering outside the federal building. By 10:15, there were at least 30 cameras set up, reporters checking microphones, photographers jockeying for position. Victoria appeared with coffee and moral support, looking terrified and determined in equal measure. I told you I'd provide the matches when you burned down the empire. Didn't think you'd actually do it. Neither did I, Adrian admitted. At 10:25, Sarah gave them the 5-minute warning. Adrian and Alara stood together at the window, looking down at the crowd that was about to watch them destroy everything. Last chance to run, she said quietly. Where would we go? I don't know, somewhere warm, somewhere without extradition treaties. Adrian took her hand. I'd rather stay and fight. Me too. She squeezed his fingers. Whatever happens after this, I want you to know something. When I married you, it was because I had no choice. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about survival and started being about actually wanting to be your partner. Alara, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that before we walk out there and potentially lose everything, including each other. Adrian pulled her closer, pressing his forehead to hers. When this is over, when the dust settles, we're going to figure out what this actually is. Not the arrangement, not the strategy. What it actually is. Deal. Sarah appeared in the doorway. It's time. They walked down together, Adrian and Alara in front, Thomas and his lawyers behind them, Sarah's team providing a protective barrier. The noise hit them the second they stepped outside. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, a wall of sound and light that felt like walking into a physical thing. Adrian stepped up to the microphone. Alara stood beside him, their hands still joined. My name is Adrian Voss, he began, and his voice carried over speakers that broadcast to the crowd, and the cameras and the world beyond. 2 months ago, I married Alara Kane in an arrangement forced by my uncle, Matthias Voss, who used blackmail to connect our families for purposes I didn't understand at the time. What I'm about to tell you is the truth about how Voss Holdings and Kane Shipping have been systematically used to traffic illegal weapons across international borders for nearly 2 decades. The crowd erupted. Adrian waited for the noise to settle, then continued. I signed documents authorizing shipments I believed were legitimate business operations. I approved routes and insurance policies without proper oversight. I failed in my duties as CEO to supervise operations that were criminal in nature and intent. For that, I take full responsibility. He could see Matthias's lawyers in the crowd, recording everything, probably already drafting lawsuits. He didn't care. But while I failed in oversight, my uncle Matthias Voss deliberately designed these operations to hide their true nature. He used shell companies, falsified manifests, and manipulated legitimate business to cover weapons deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The evidence we're releasing today shows a pattern of criminal activity spanning nearly 20 years. Alara stepped forward then. My family's shipping company was similarly exploited. We believed we were providing legitimate cargo services. Instead, we were being used as cover for international weapons trafficking. When we discovered the truth, we immediately contacted federal authorities and have been cooperating fully with their investigation. Questions started flying. Adrian answered the ones he could, deflected the ones he couldn't. Yes, he expected to face charges. Yes, he was resigning as CEO of Voss Holdings effective immediately. No. He didn't know where his uncle currently was. The press conference lasted 45 minutes. By the time it ended, Adrian's phone was exploding with messages. His mother, crying. Victoria, sending heart emojis and texts that just said "holy shit" repeatedly. Marcus, asking if Adrian needed anything, which was more loyalty than he deserved. And one message from an unknown number. You just made the worst mistake of your life. They were escorted back inside by federal agents who suddenly treated them more like witnesses than criminals. Sarah met them in the same conference room, looking energized in a way that suggested the press conference had done exactly what she'd hoped. That was perfect, she said. Matthias's legal team is already trying to spin it, but you took away their main weapon. They can't claim you're hiding behind ignorance when you just admitted culpability publicly. What happens now? Thomas asked. Now we move fast. Raids on Voss Holdings facilities, Kane shipping offices, every shell company we can connect to the operation. Matthias will try to destroy evidence, but he won't be fast enough. Sarah pulled out her phone. I need you three somewhere safe. Matthias is cornered, and cornered animals are dangerous. We have a place, Alara said. My mother's house. Matthias doesn't know the address. They spent the next 6 hours in a suburb 20 miles outside the city, watching news coverage of federal raids on buildings Adrian had walked through countless times. Voss Tower, surrounded by agents. Kane shipping headquarters, cargo containers being opened and cataloged. Matthias's Greenwich estate, where his mother was being questioned but not arrested because she genuinely knew nothing. Adrian's phone rang constantly. Reporters, lawyers, board members demanding explanations he couldn't give. He stopped answering around hour 3. Alara's mother, Rosa Kane, was a small woman with fierce eyes and the kind of calm that came from surviving worse things than corporate scandal. She made them pasta and wine and didn't ask questions she knew they couldn't answer yet. Your father called, she told Alara. He's at the federal building giving a statement. He said to tell you he's proud of you. For destroying this family business? For choosing what's right over what's easy? Rosa touched her daughter's face. That's always been your gift. And your burden. Night fell. They watched the news show Matthias's face on every channel, wanted for questioning, whereabouts unknown. Adrian's own face appeared almost as often, the man who'd brought down his family empire. Do you regret it? Alara asked later, when they were alone in the guest room Rosa had set up for them. One room, one bed, the assumption of a real marriage finally matching reality. No, Adrian said. I regret that it took me this long. I regret that I didn't ask harder questions earlier. But taking him down, that I don't regret. Even if we lose everything, we already lost the things that mattered. Our reputations, our companies, our illusions about who our families actually were. He pulled her close. But we found something too. What? Each other. Actually, each other, not the performance we were doing for Matthias. Alara was quiet for a moment. You know this doesn't end clean, right? Even if Matthias goes to prison, even if we avoid serious charges, our lives are permanently changed. We'll always be the people who destroyed the Voss Empire. Good. Maybe the Voss Empire deserved to be destroyed. She kissed him then, urgent and real, and nothing like the performance at their wedding. Adrian kissed back, feeling like they were finally starting something instead of ending it. His phone rang again. Sarah Chen. We found him, she said without preamble. Matthias. He was trying to board a private jet to Switzerland. We have him in custody. Adrian felt something release in his chest. Is it over? The arrest part is. The legal part is just beginning. But yes, Adrian, he's not walking away from this. They arrested Matthias Voss at 11:30 that night at a private airfield in New Jersey. Adrian watched the footage on the news, his uncle in handcuffs, being led away by federal agents while cameras caught every second. Matthias looked smaller somehow, diminished without his power and his threats and his carefully constructed empire of secrets. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions and legal meetings and slowly piecing together exactly how extensive the damage was. Voss Holdings filed for bankruptcy after the raids revealed that nearly 40% of their assets were connected to illegal operations. Kane Shipping survived, barely, after Thomas agreed to a complete restructuring and independent oversight. Adrian faced charges of criminal negligence and regulatory violations. The prosecutor offered a plea deal: 2 years probation, massive fines, permanent ban from serving as a corporate officer. His lawyer said it was a gift considering what he could have faced. Adrian took it. Alara faced similar charges, but her cooperation and earlier warnings to authorities earned her a lighter sentence: 1 year probation, fines she could actually afford, no permanent bans because she'd never officially run her father's company anyway. Matthias went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming: weapons trafficking, money laundering, fraud, conspiracy charges that stacked up like building blocks. His lawyers tried everything, claiming national security exemptions that fell apart under scrutiny, arguing that he was actually helping intelligence operations that no intelligence agency would confirm. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 3 months after the press conference. Adrian and Alara sat in the courtroom, watching as the judge methodically destroyed what remained of Matthias Voss's life. 25 years in federal prison, asset forfeiture, restitution payments that would take multiple lifetimes to complete. Matthias didn't look at them. Not once. It was the final insult, the last assertion of control. He would go to prison still pretending Adrian didn't matter enough to acknowledge. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. Adrian had learned to navigate these moments without saying anything that could be used against him later. "How do you feel about the verdict?" Justice was served. "Do you regret your role in the operation?" "Every day." "What's next for you?" That question stopped him. He looked at Alara, who was fielding her own questions with practiced deflection. She caught his eye and smiled slightly, and in that moment Adrian knew exactly what was next. They'd spent 3 months living in limbo, waiting for legal proceedings to resolve, trying to figure out who they were without the companies and the empires and the weight of family legacies crushing them. They'd been partners through all of it, but they'd been careful not to define what that partnership meant beyond survival. Now survival was guaranteed, which meant they had to decide if they were staying together because they wanted to or because they'd gotten used to it. The reporters eventually dispersed. Adrian and Alara walked away from the courthouse toward nothing in particular, just away from the noise and the cameras and the weight of the past. "So," Alara said, "we're officially unemployed criminals with probation requirements and no clear career prospects. Don't forget the massive fines and complete destruction of our professional reputations." "Right. Can't forget those." She was quiet for a moment. "What do we actually do now?" Adrian had been thinking about that, about the Harbor District families he'd almost displaced before everything exploded, about Marcus's questions about doing things right instead of profitable, about the fact that he'd spent his whole life building power he didn't believe in. "I want to do something that actually matters," he said. "Not empires or profit margins or quarterly earnings. Something real." "Like what?" "I don't know yet, but I know I want to do it with you." Alara stopped walking. They were in a park now, somehow. Trees overhead and grass underfoot, and the city visible but distant. "Are you asking me to stay married to you?" she asked. "For real this time?" "I'm asking if you want to figure out what comes next together. Partners. Actually partners, not just people trapped in the same disaster. You realize we're terrible at normal, right? We got married under blackmail, investigated international weapons trafficking, and destroyed our family's empires. I'm not sure we know how to just be normal married people." "Then we'll be abnormal married people. We'll figure it out as we go." Adrian took her hands. "I know I want to wake up next to you. I know I want to build something new instead of protecting something old. And I know that every time I think about the future, you're in it. So if that's not love, it's close enough that I want to see where it goes." Alara looked at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, bright and genuine. "You're proposing to your wife. That's very weird." "Everything about us is weird." "True." She kissed him, soft and certain. "Yes. I want to figure it out together. I want to build something that matters. And I want to be with someone who chose to burn down an empire rather than rule a corrupt one. That's a very low bar, but you'd be surprised how rare it is." They stood in the park as the sun set, two people who'd been forced together and chose to stay, who'd lost everything and found something better in the wreckage. Adrian thought about his father, who'd built an empire on fear and died afraid his son would reject it. He thought about Matthias, who'd spent 40 years accumulating power and ended up with nothing but a prison cell. And he thought about the fact that the only thing his father had been right about was that the empire would destroy whoever tried to rule it. Adrian had just chosen to destroy it first. 6 months later, they stood in front of a building in Harbor District that had once been scheduled for demolition. Adrian had bought it with the last of his accessible assets before the bankruptcy finalized. Alara had convinced her father to donate shipping containers that could be converted to affordable housing. The sign above the door read Voss Kane Community Center. It was presumptuous to use their names after everything, but Alara had insisted. "We don't get to erase what we did," she'd said, "but we can attach our names to something that helps instead of hurts." They offered services to the families Adrian had almost displaced: legal aid, job training, affordable housing advocacy. It wasn't glamorous. It definitely wasn't profitable, but it was real in a way nothing else in Adrian's life had ever been. Victoria showed up for the opening, bringing champagne and tears. "I can't believe you actually did it. Went from corporate empire to nonprofit housing advocacy." "Technically, we went from corporate empire to federal investigation, to criminal probation, to nonprofit housing advocacy," Alara corrected. "But yeah, I'm proud of you, both of you." Victoria raised her glass. "To people who choose what's right over what's easy." They drank to that. Thomas appeared with Rosa, both of them looking older but lighter somehow, like the weight of the shipping company had been crushing them longer than they'd realized. Thomas had sold the business to a legitimate operator and was consulting on maritime law reform. "Boring," he claimed. "Peaceful," Rosa corrected. Marcus stopped by with his family, having survived the Voss Holdings collapse by cooperating with investigators and leveraging his CFO experience into a position with a clean company. He pulled Adrian aside. "I was wrong about you, Sim," he said. "I thought you were like your father, ruthless, profit-focused, willing to ignore anything that got in the way of growth. I was like that. No, you were playing a role you thought you had to play. There's a difference." Marcus smiled. "The real you is much more interesting." Adrian's mother appeared last, looking fragile but present. She'd spent months in therapy processing the truth about her husband and brother-in-law, about the empire she'd enjoyed without questioning its foundations. She hugged Adrian like she was afraid he'd disappear. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For not seeing, for not asking questions, for teaching you that power mattered more than people. You were surviving, Mom, just like everyone else. Still, I should have been better." She pulled back. "But you are better. You and Alara both. You're building something your father never could have understood." As evening fell, Adrian found Alara on the roof of their building, looking out at the neighborhood they were trying to help rebuild. She'd changed from her opening day dress into jeans and a sweater, hair down, looking more like herself than she had in months. "Tired?" he asked, joining her at the edge. "Exhausted, but good exhausted. The kind where you actually accomplish something." They stood in comfortable silence, watching lights come on in windows, families settling in for the evening, the ordinary magic of people just living their lives. "Do you miss it?" Alara asked eventually. "The power, the empire. Being the person who walked into rooms and everyone paid attention." Adrian considered that honestly. Sometimes, not the empire itself, but the certainty, knowing exactly who I was and what I was supposed to be doing. And now? Now I have no idea what I'm doing most days. But I'm doing it with you, and it means something, and that feels better than certainty ever did. She leaned into him. "I love you. I don't think I've actually said that yet." "You haven't. I love you. The real you, not the CEO or the Voss heir or the guy playing chess with his uncle. The person who chose to fall on his sword publicly rather than let Matthias win. The person who wants to help displaced families instead of displace them. That person." Adrian kissed the top of her head. "I love you too. The consultant who was too smart for her own good. The partner who jumped when I jumped. The person who sees what needs to be done and does it even when it's terrifying. We're very dramatic. You know that, right? We destroyed an empire together. Dramatic is basically our baseline." She laughed. They stayed on the roof until the neighborhood quieted, until the city settled into its nighttime rhythm, until it was just them and the future stretching out, uncertain and terrifying and full of possibility. They'd lost everything they'd thought mattered: the money, the power, the family legacies that had defined them since birth. But they'd found something better in the wreckage: purpose, partnership. The knowledge that what you built yourself mattered more than what you inherited. Matthias was in prison. The empires were gone. The families were rebuilding, and Adrian and Alara were just two people trying to make the world slightly better than they'd found it, one community center and one displaced family at a time. It wasn't the ending Adrian had expected when he'd first agreed to marry a stranger. It was better. Because power, he'd learned, was never about control. It was never about forcing others to bend to your will, or building empires that outlasted you, or accumulating wealth until you couldn't spend it all. Power was about choosing who you became when everything else was stripped away. It was about standing beside someone when the world was burning and deciding together what to build from the ashes. It was about looking at the legacy you'd been given and having the courage to say it wasn't good enough, that you wanted to be better, that you would break everything to prove it. His father had feared Adrian would destroy the empire once he understood what it was built on. He'd been right about that much. But what his father never understood was that some things deserved to be destroyed, that sometimes the only way to build something worth keeping was to burn down everything that came before. Adrian had burned down an empire, and in its place he was building something smaller, quieter, infinitely more valuable, a life that mattered, a partnership built on choice instead of coercion, a future defined by what he created rather than what he inherited. He looked at Alara, silhouetted against the city lights, and knew with absolute certainty that every decision that led here had been worth it. This was power, the real kind, the kind that couldn't be taken away because it came from within, and it was enough.